The Ghost Signal by J.W. The radio crackled at 2:13 a.m. Not a pop or a hiss, not static, but something else. A whisper, low and guttural, crawling in through the wires. Evelyn Wallace froze, his fingers hovering over the worn dial, heart hammering in his chest. He hadn't touched the damn thing in years. Not since the purge. Not since they made it illegal to listen to anything except the sanctioned broadcast, the droning voice of the minister of truth, issuing platitudes like some Orwellian bedtime story. But this was different. A voice, just beneath the surface of the static. "They are watching," it whispered. Evelyn shoved back from the desk so hard the chair screeched against the cracked linoleum. His apartment was silent except for the old clock ticking on the wall and the distant hum of the city outside. New Unity, they called it now. A monument to order. A utopia of the obedient. A prison with invisible bars. He ran a hand over his face, his palm coming away damp. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. Maybe it was the damn conformity pills that turned his stomach to knots and made him nauseated. But deep down, he knew better. The voice was real. He was hearing a ghost. Evelyn had been a history professor once, before history was rewritten. He used to lecture on philosophy, ethics, political systems, the kind of subjects that made people think. That was before the ministry decided thinking wasn't in the best interest of the state. Now, the only people who talked about history were the ones rewriting it. His quiet compliance had kept him safe. He had watched friends disappear, students arrested for misinformation, and colleagues dragged from their homes in the dead of night. He told himself that silence was survival. That keeping his head down wasn't cowardice, it was rationality. But the anger never left. It just festered, deep and slow, like rot in the bones. And now, someone, something, was reaching out to him. The next night, he sat in the dark, the old radio humming on the desk. The city outside was a grid of dimmed streetlights, a machine operating on carefully maintained control. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the static shifted. Evelyn Wallace. His breath hitched. They know you. They watch. But they are not the only ones. His hands clenched into fists. "Who are you?" he whispered, throat tight. The pause stretched long enough for doubt to creep in. But then, the voice returned. "We are the ones who remember." A chill rolled down his spine. We are the ones they erased. The ghosts of the regime. The voices of the purged. His hands trembled as he reached for the dial, but before he could turn it, the voice said, "You can still choose, Evelyn. Fear or truth. Silence or defiance." The radio went dead. For 3 nights, Evelyn didn't sleep. He felt watched. Not just by the cameras, not just by the drones that buzzed through the streets like mechanical bats. Something deeper. An awareness pressing against the edges of his mind. The state called them the forgotten. Those who had been erased, not just from life, but from memory. Their records burned, their faces removed from photographs. It was as if they had never existed. The ultimate punishment. But they existed here. In the static. In the gaps between sanctioned truth. And they were calling to him. The night before his life changed forever, Evelyn stood at his window, staring out at the hollow city. He saw the towers stretching upward, cold and faceless, the streets swept clean of dissent. He thought about how easy it would be to keep pretending. To let the indifference win. Fear had kept him alive this long. Fear had kept him safe. But was this really living? He turned, walked to the desk, and flipped the switch on the radio. Static. Then, whispers. "The ministry fears one thing, Evelyn." His fingers curled around the edge of the desk. "What?" "The truth." He swallowed hard. "What do you want me to do?" For a moment, the static stretched, thick and heavy. Then the voice said, "Speak." The next day, Evelyn Wallace stepped into the square. The screens above flickered with the ever-smiling face of the minister, his voice pouring through the city like syrup, sticky and suffocating. "Our unity is our strength. Our strength is our future," he chimed. The crowd shuffled forward in the morning commute, heads bowed, no one looking at anyone else. All of them afraid. Evelyn stopped. He took a breath. And then, he spoke. Loud. Clear. Strong. "They are lying to you." People froze. A breath of silence swept through the crowd, the kind of hush that only happens before a storm. He spoke again, voice steady, anger boiling over years of suppression. "The regime is built on a lie. On fear. And we," his chest rose, his heart a hammer against his ribs, "we are not afraid." Gasps. Murmurs. People lifting their heads. Then, the sirens. Boots thudding against pavement. The enforcers were coming. He knew what happened next. The arrest. The interrogation. The slow, merciless purge from existence. But then, something else happened. The radio buzzed. Every radio. A whisper rippled through the speakers, through every transmission. "We are the ones who remember." The screens flickered. The minister's face twisted, warped, and then, suddenly, it was gone. Instead, the images of the forgotten filled the screens. Their faces. Their names. Their voices. Everything the regime had erased. The city stopped. People stared. People saw. And in that moment, Evelyn knew. He had broken the silence. And the ghosts had answered. They came for him, of course. Dragged him into the back of a black van. Threw him into a concrete room with no windows, and did things to him. Terrible things. They asked him why. Why now? Why speak? Evelyn only smiled. Because in the dark corners of the city, the radios still whispered. Because fear only worked when people were alone. Because he was not afraid anymore. And neither were the ghosts.